On what seemed like an ordinary morning at Horizon International Airport, the pilot's lounge was unusually quiet. The sound of footsteps echoed steadily across the polished tile floor. But within minutes, that peaceful space would become the epicenter of a justice storm powerful enough to shake the entire aviation industry. In a quiet corner seat, a 16-year-old black boy sat engrossed in a documentary about the history of aviation. Dressed in a crisp white shirt, a name tag with the Horizon Airlines logo hung from his neck. His eyes sparkled with excitement. Elijah Jackson, the teenager who had just been accepted into a prestigious career experience program, beating out hundreds of other candidates. But Elijah didn't yet know that in just a few minutes, that very badge, the symbol of his dream, would be ripped away by prejudice, and his single phone call would change the course of his life and the fate of a veteran airline captain. Elijah leaned back in the lounge chair, eyes fixed on the TV screen as the documentary played footage of a Boeing 747 soaring into the sky. His mind wandered, picturing himself in the cockpit someday, hands on the controls, heart steady with purpose. Then bang, the door swung open, slamming against the wall like a thunderclap. Startled, Elijah sat up straight, eyes wide. A woman in a pristine pilot uniform strode into the room. Her presence was sharp and commanding. For golden stripes glistened on her shoulders, Captain Rebecca Whitman. She locked eyes with Elijah and immediately frowned. Without even a greeting, she marched toward him, her steps slicing through the air like a blade. "You," she snapped, her voice cold and loaded. "Who let you in here? What are you doing in the pilot's lounge?" Elijah stood up quickly, heart pounding. "Hello, ma'am. I'm Elijah Jackson. I'm part of Horizon Airlines Career Exploration Program. Ms. Reynolds from HR brought me here. I'm just waiting for my guide." Whitman's lips curled into a smirk, but there was no humor behind it, only contempt. "Career exploration," she scoffed. "This isn't a playground. Especially not for outsiders like you. Get out, now." Her words slapped the air like thunder, and for a moment, Elijah felt his dream wobble beneath his feet. Elijah's hand instinctively went to the ID badge hanging around his neck. "But ma'am," he said, trying to stay calm, "this is my badge. Ms. Reynolds said I could wait here. She gave it to me herself." Before he could finish, Captain Whitman reached out and snatched the badge from his neck, the lanyard snapping with a sharp pop that echoed through the room. She flipped it over, barely glancing at it before shaking her head furiously. "Fake badge, I knew it." Her voice was laced with certainty that came not from evidence but from assumption. "A kid like you doesn't belong in a restricted area like this. This is a serious security breach." Elijah's chest tightened, the air in the room growing thinner by the second. He hadn't even done anything. He was just sitting. Captain Whitman pulled out her radio, speaking into it without hesitation. "Security to the pilot's lounge immediately. We have an intruder potentially using false credentials." A chill swept over Elijah's body. What was happening? Was this how dreams died, not in flames, but in quiet, suffocating doubt and humiliation? As the call crackled through the radio, footsteps echoed outside. Curious airport staff and a few off-duty pilots began to gather near the glass wall of the pilot's lounge. Their eyes wide and unblinking landed squarely on Elijah. He stood frozen, every breath shallow, his mind racing. "Ma'am, please," Elijah said, voice shaking but respectful. "You can call Ms. Reynolds. I've been here only 20 minutes. I didn't sneak in. I didn't do anything wrong." Captain Whitman didn't flinch. She held up the badge like it was a weapon or a piece of damning evidence. "Everyone listen," she barked to the gathering staff. "We're trained to recognize threats. This is exactly how infiltrations happen. Unauthorized entry with fake IDs, gathering sensitive information, potentially planning sabotage." Gasps and murmurs fluttered through the crowd like falling ash. Elijah turned, eyes pleading, scanning the faces for anyone to speak on his behalf. But no one stepped forward, no one spoke up. And in that moment, Elijah realized he was completely alone. Elijah's heart was pounding so loudly he could barely hear anything else. Two security officers burst into the room, their steps heavy and urgent. One of them, a tall man with a stern face, looked at Captain Whitman, who immediately pointed at Elijah. "That's him. I want him removed and searched thoroughly," she said, her tone cold and definitive. The officer approached Elijah, scanning him head to toe like he was already guilty. "Young man," he said with forced neutrality, "please come with us. We need to verify your identity and clarify the situation." Elijah instinctively stepped back, his voice trembling but determined. I really was allowed to be here. I'm part of the Horizon program. Ms. Reynolds gave me the badge. She's just outside. Please call her." Captain Whitman cut in sharply, arms crossed. "We've heard enough. Flight safety isn't negotiable, and I won't let excuses delay this any further." Panic twisted Elijah's stomach into knots. Then he whispered, almost pleadingly, "Please ... can I call my dad? He'll explain everything." Whitman scoffed. "Go ahead," she sneered. "I doubt your father can do much unless he's cleaning floors at this airport." The room went silent, but Elijah didn't respond. He was already reaching for his phone, fingers trembling. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Each ring felt like an eternity, the silence in the room growing heavier with every second. Elijah stared at the screen, willing his father to pick up, every heartbeat a countdown. But in the midst of that tension, memories came flooding back, sweet, powerful flashes of childhood. The day his father, David Jackson, took him on his first airport tour for his 6th birthday. The way they stood together under the wing of a Boeing 777 as it roared overhead. The wonder in his father's voice as he explained how planes stayed in the sky. "You belong up there," his father had said, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. "But to fly, you'll need courage. Because the sky doesn't care what anyone says about you, it only responds to how far you're willing to go." Elijah blinked away, the sting in his eyes, breathing in shakily. He wasn't just calling for help. He was calling the one person who had always believed he could fly. And at that moment, the phone stopped ringing. "Elijah?" His father's voice had never sounded more powerful. "Dad," Elijah's voice cracked as the tears he had been holding back finally escaped. "They said I trespassed into the pilot's lounge. They think I forged my ID. No one's listening to me. I didn't do anything wrong." There was a long pause on the other end. For a second, Elijah feared the worst, that his father didn't know what to say either. But then a deep, steady voice cut through the silence. "Elijah, stay exactly where you are. I'm on my way. I'll take care of this personally." Elijah's knees almost buckled in relief. That one sentence from his father felt like an anchor, grounding him amid the storm of fear and humiliation. Captain Whitman, overhearing part of the conversation, smirked and called out loudly, "What's wrong?" "Had to call your daddy. Let me guess, he's on janitor duty this morning?" The laughter that followed cut deep, but Elijah said nothing. He just stood there, holding onto his phone like it was the only shield he had left. Captain Whitman turned to the room, stepping forward like she was holding court. "I hope everyone here understands the seriousness of this breach," she declared loudly. "This isn't just some misunderstanding. This could be a test run, a recon mission. Industrial espionage. We can't rule anything out." Elijah stared at her in disbelief. Was this really happening? From a quiet teenager waiting politely in a lounge, to being labeled a spy? He felt the judgmental stares tighten around him like a noose. Whitman continued, "He just called his parents. Maybe they're trying to help him sneak in. Who knows what their real plan is?" Snickers filled the air again. Elijah felt the room spin slightly. His fists clenched, nails digging into his palms, but still, he refused to cry in front of them. A sudden buzz pierced the tension. One of the security officers' radios crackled to life. "All units, be advised, VIP from the Federal Aviation Administration is en route to the pilot's lounge. Prepare to receive immediately." The entire room fell into a stunned silence. Captain Whitman's smirk faltered. A VIP from the FAA? Why would the FAA care about a teenager? She scoffed, trying to hide the flicker of doubt in her voice. But Elijah knew, he knew exactly why. Because the man walking toward the lounge at that very moment wasn't just any parent. He was David Jackson, FAA Administrator, National Authority on Aviation Safety, and most importantly, his father. The sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor sharp, commanding, unhurried. Every eye turned toward the lounge entrance, and then the door opened. A tall man in a dark FAA suit stepped inside, eyes scanning the room with quiet authority. Behind him trailed several senior officials, all stone-faced and serious. David Jackson. He didn't need to raise his voice. His very presence sent a ripple through the room. Elijah's breath caught in his throat. The moment their eyes met, it was as if the weight on his shoulders finally lifted. David crossed the room in a straight line, past the whispering staff, past the stunned pilots, past the officers who had nearly handcuffed his son. He stopped in front of Elijah, gently placed a hand on his trembling shoulder, and said with a voice calm but firm, "Elijah, are you okay? I'm here now. Don't worry anymore." A hush spread across the lounge like fog over a runway. Elijah nodded, his tears threatening to fall again, this time not from fear, but from sheer relief. His father's presence felt like armor. David turned slowly to face Captain Whitman, who stood frozen, face pale. "I am David Jackson, Administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration," he said, his voice like a storm held barely in check. "I've been informed that my son, Elijah Jackson, has been publicly humiliated and falsely accused of breaching airport security." Whitman stammered, "Mr. Jackson, I didn't know he was your son. We were just trying to ensure safety." David cut her off sharply. "The safety of our airports is indeed a priority. But it does not justify racial profiling, abuse of authority, or degrading a child in front of a crowd." Now the faces in the room shifted in easy glances, discomfort blooming. Suddenly, it was Whitman who looked like the intruder. David turned to the FAA officials behind him and gave a single nod. One of them stepped forward with a tablet in hand. "We've reviewed the security footage from earlier today," the man announced. "We'd like to play it now." He connected the tablet to a screen on the wall. Silence fell once more as the footage began. There, in crystal clarity, was Miss Tanya Reynolds from HR escorting Elijah into the pilot's lounge. She handed him a badge, pointed out where to sit, and left following every protocol. Then the video showed Elijah quietly watching TV, never leaving his chair, never acting suspicious. Then came the moment Captain Whitman stormed in, accusing, grabbing, degrading without even checking the ID. When the video ended, no one said a word because the truth was undeniable. When the screen went black, the only thing that remained was silence, thick and suffocating. Captain Whitman looked as if the ground had been pulled out from under her. Her hands hung stiffly at her sides, her eyes searching the room for a lifeline. There was none. One of the FAA officials stepped forward again, his voice louder now. "In addition to the footage, we've also reviewed internal records from both the FAA and Horizon Airlines." He paused, then said with unmistakable weight, "This is not the first time Captain Whitman has been reported for racially biased behavior." Gasps swept through the room, faces turned. Captain Whitman's mouth opened, but no words came out. The official continued, 3 prior complaints, each involving groundless accusations, all against employees or visitors of color. The air shifted, disbelief turned into understanding, judgment into condemnation. Her badge didn't shine as brightly now. David Jackson stepped forward once more, his voice calm but utterly resolute. "As administrator of the FAA, and in accordance with our ethical code and professional responsibility," he said, looking directly at Whitman, "I hereby suspend Captain Rebecca Whitman from duty effective immediately." A collective gasp surged through the room, Whitman's face drained of all color. "You will be subject to a full investigation regarding your conduct, decision-making, and history of bias within the workplace, David continued. Until this is resolved, you are prohibited from performing any flight or administrative duties. Two airport security officers walked quietly toward Whitman. She flinched not at their presence, but at the realization that she had lost something far greater than a title. She had lost trust, she had lost the room. And worse, she had lost herself. As the tension in the room began to fade, a new presence emerged from the crowd. A woman in uniform, tall and poised, stepped forward. Her uniform bore the same golden stripes as Whitman's once had, but the way she wore them was different. She extended a hand toward Elijah, a warm smile on her face. "Elijah, I'm Captain Amara Johnson." A few people in the room visibly recognized her, a veteran pilot with over 20 years in the skies, respected not just for her skill, but for her advocacy for diversity in aviation. "I saw everything," she said, "and I want you to know you belong here." Elijah's eyes widened, still unsure if he was dreaming. Captain Johnson continued, "I'm about to fly a 787 Dreamliner. Would you like to come see the cockpit? Let me show you where you truly belong." Elijah glanced at his father. David gave him a quiet, proud nod. And together Elijah and Captain Johnson walked out of the lounge. As they moved through the terminal, something had changed. The looks from others were no longer cold or suspicious. There were nods, apologies whispered, respectful glances. The door to the jetway opened, and Elijah followed Captain Johnson onto the plane. She guided him toward the cockpit, a place Elijah had only ever seen in books and dreams. Lights blinked, buttons glowed. The control panels looked like the inside of a spaceship. And to Elijah, they were more beautiful than anything else in the world. Captain Johnson looked at him and said, "This is the place I believe you'll stand one day. Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise." Elijah stepped inside. The pilot's seat, the throttle, the instruments. It all felt surreal and yet completely right. For the first time that day, his heart wasn't pounding from fear. It was racing from hope. Captain Johnson leaned close and whispered, "You know, I went through something like this once 2 years ago. People doubted me before I ever touched a plane, but I didn't quit." She smiled. "We don't quit, we rise." Elijah's hands gently touched the control yoke. It wasn't just a dream anymore, it was a promise. While Elijah stood in the cockpit, feeling the spark of something much greater than himself, his father was already back in the FAA Operations Center working to make sure this never happened again. David Jackson had seen enough, not just from Whitman, but from the system that allowed her kind of bias to go unchecked. Within days, he drafted a new initiative, a nationwide FAA program to increase diversity in aviation, starting with underrepresented youth. Within days, he drafted a new initiative, a nationwide FAA program to increase diversity in aviation, starting with underrepresented youth. "We don't just need more pilots," David said in a press briefing. "We need a more just and inclusive industry. One where talent is welcomed, not profiled, and it wasn't just talk." Weeks later, Elijah found himself standing in front of a school auditorium filled with students. It was the first time he had spoken publicly since the incident. His palms were sweaty, but his voice was strong. "I was told I didn't belong. I was accused of being a threat. All because of how I look," he told the crowd. "But I'm here today because I didn't give up, because my father stood up for me. Because someone believed I belonged in the sky." The room was silent, hanging on every word. "And you," Elijah continued, looking out at faces of all colors and backgrounds, "you belong to." The applause was thunderous. Soon, Elijah was speaking at workshops, aviation camps, and high schools. His story had become more than just a personal triumph. It had become a movement. He was named a youth ambassador for the FAA, helping launch programs for kids across the country. Each time he spoke, he ended with the same words: "Your background is not your limitation. Your dream is your power. And the sky will always have room for you if you dare to fly." He was no longer just Elijah Jackson, the boy falsely accused. He was Elijah Jackson, the voice of change. Elijah's story spread quickly across news outlets, social media, and aviation forums. His name became a symbol of justice, dignity, and hope. Airlines across the country began reviewing their diversity training, and airports initiated reforms in security protocols and personnel conduct. The FAA, under David Jackson's leadership, launched a mentorship pipeline for minority youth interested in aviation careers. One headline read, "From Suspect to Symbol, How Elijah Jackson is Reshaping the Skies." And beneath that, a quote from Elijah: "Don't change your dream to fit the world. Change the world to fit your dream." Back at Horizon Airlines, an independent investigation into Captain Whitman's behavior was completed. The findings were damning. Not only had she violated protocol, but she had a pattern of racial bias that had long been ignored. The verdict: Captain Rebecca Whitman was permanently removed from all flight duties and stripped of her license. When asked by the press for a comment, she said nothing. Because sometimes silence is all that's left when truth exposes arrogance, Elijah never celebrated her downfall. He simply said, "I didn't want revenge. I wanted to be treated like I mattered, and I still do." Though justice had been served, healing took time. Elijah returned to the pilot's lounge weeks later, this time invited as a guest of honor. He stood in the same spot where he was once humiliated, and a group of pilots stood before him, applauding. One stepped forward, a man who had watched everything that day but hadn't spoken up. "I should have said something," the pilot confessed, eyes downcast. "I'm sorry, Elijah." Truly, Elijah looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "It's not too late to speak up now," he replied. "Not just for me, for the next kid who walks through that door." Months later, the same pilot's lounge that once echoed with suspicion and cruelty underwent a quiet transformation. Above the entrance, a new plaque had been installed. It read, "Dedicated to opportunity, respect, and inclusion in honor of Elijah Jackson." Pilots and staff would stop, read it, and think. It became more than a reminder of what happened. It became a promise that no one would ever be judged by their skin color, but by their character and dreams. Elijah visited the lounge again, standing beneath the plaque. He didn't feel anger anymore, he felt peace. Meanwhile, David Jackson's movement to reform aviation from the inside out was gaining national traction. The FAA's Wings for All initiative, his brainchild, was rolled out across the country, offering scholarships, mentorship, and career tracks for students from underserved communities. In an interview, David said, "Every young person deserves a runway for their dreams clear, open, and free from judgment." When asked what inspired it all, he answered simply, "My son." One quiet morning, Captain Amara Johnson requested a special co-pilot for her short flight from Washington, D.C. to Atlanta. That co-pilot was Elijah Jackson. He wore a crisp white shirt, his own name badge, and a quiet, proud smile. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Johnson turned to him and said, "You feel that?" Elijah nodded, eyes locked on the sky beyond the glass. "Yeah," he said, "it doesn't feel out of reach anymore." And for the first time, Elijah didn't just dream of flying, he was flying. "I don't just think you can, I know you can. Because the only thing that ever stopped me was someone else's fear, not mine." The room was silent, then erupted in applause. And in that moment, Elijah realized something. He wasn't just reclaiming his own future, he was helping others claim theirs. Months later, Elijah stood at a newsstand in an airport. His heart skipped when he saw it. There he was on the cover of Aviation Today. The headline read, "The future has landed. How one teen changed the skies." He opened the article. It told his full story, from the humiliation in the pilot lounge to the initiatives now launched across the country. But it wasn't the fame that moved him. It was the final quote they printed in big, bold letters. "Dignity doesn't fly on engines, it flies on courage, Elijah Jackson." Late one evening, Elijah received a message request on social media from an unfamiliar name. It read, "Hi, you don't know me, but I was there that day. In the lounge, I didn't speak up and I've regretted it every day since. But because of what you went through, my company now runs mandatory diversity training and I've stood up for others since. I just wanted to say thank you for being brave when the rest of us weren't." Elijah stared at the screen for a long time. He didn't reply immediately. He didn't need to. Because that message said it all. His silence that day had become a roar. At a major aviation summit, Elijah was invited as the keynote speaker. Industry leaders, politicians, future pilots, all in attendance. He stood at the podium, calm and clear, his voice echoing across the hall. "We've spent too long pretending the cockpit is only for a chosen few. But the sky doesn't ask where you're from, what color you are, or what neighborhood you grew up in. The sky only asks, are you ready to fly?" And with that, he closed with the line that had become his calling card. The future of aviation isn't just wings, it's justice. The applause that followed wasn't polite, it was thunderous. Because everyone knew this wasn't just about a boy who had been wrong. This was about a world that was finally trying to make things right. Months later, Elijah boarded a commercial flight not as a passenger, but as a training cadet in uniform, part of his formal flight academy experience. As he walked down the jet bridge, a flight attendant greeted him with a bright smile. "You're Elijah Jackson, right?" She whispered, "We've all been waiting for you. The captain left a note for you in the cockpit." Elijah stepped in, heart racing. The note was taped to the control panel. It read, "To the skies you never stopped believing in, welcome home, Captain Amar Johnson." He ran his hand across the panel and whispered back, "I'm home." On a clear autumn afternoon, David Jackson sat in the jump seat of a flight simulator, watching Elijah at the controls. It was a quiet moment, just father and son, the hum of instruments around them. "You're handling it like a pro," David said. Elijah smiled. "You always said the sky was open if I had courage, and you proved it." For a moment, neither spoke. Then David added, "You turned a moment of injustice into a movement of purpose. You didn't just fly, Elijah, you lifted us all." Years passed. Elijah became a licensed commercial pilot. At a youth outreach event, a small boy approached him, wide-eyed and nervous. He clutched a toy airplane in his hand. "Sir ... do you think I can be a pilot one day?" Elijah knelt down, smiled gently, and said, "I don't just think so, I believe it with all my heart." He took off his own training badge and handed it to the boy. "Here, this got me through my toughest day. Now it's yours." The boy clutched it tightly, his eyes shining. And just like that, the dream was passed on, not in silence, but in strength. Years after the incident that changed everything, a new wing was unveiled at the National Aviation Museum in Washington, D.C. Its name, the Elijah Jackson Hall of Equal Skies. Inside were interactive exhibits, stories of barrier-breaking pilots, and a full replica of the cockpit Elijah first sat in with Captain Johnson. At the center stood a bronze plaque engraved with the words, "In honor of those who refused to let prejudice ground their dreams." When Elijah visited the exhibit with his father, he didn't say much. He didn't have to. Their eyes said everything. One day, Elijah received a letter, handwritten, neat cursive on cream paper. It began, "Dear Elijah, I was on the board of Horizon Airlines the day they suspended Captain Whitman. I voted in silence, ashamed of how long we had ignored warning signs. But your story, your strength woke something in all of us. I just wanted you to know, because of you, we changed our policies, we changed our hiring, and most importantly, we changed our hearts." It was signed with respect and gratitude. A man who finally listened. Elijah read it twice, then carefully folded it. Sometimes justice whispers in quiet envelopes. At a Horizon Airlines graduation ceremony for cadet pilots, an announcement echoed through the hangar. Elijah Jackson, class speaker and highest honors graduate. As he stepped up to speak, he noticed something different on the stage. An empty captain's seat, a card rested on it, with 4 gold stripes and a single message. "This was always meant for you." He paused during his speech and pointed to it. "This seat," he said, "is not just for me. It's for anyone who's ever been told they don't belong. Because today, I sit in it, so others can, too." The room rose in a standing ovation. And Elijah this time didn't hold back the tears. Years later, in a quiet interview for a retired pilot's magazine, Rebecca Whitman spoke publicly for the first time. Her hair was gray now, her voice lower, humbled. "I spent my whole career believing I was protecting the industry," she said. "But the truth is, I let fear and bias guide me. And I nearly destroyed a boy's dream because of it." She looked directly at the camera. "Elijah Jackson didn't just prove me wrong, he showed me what real professionalism looks like. And though I can't undo the past, I hope others learn from it." The article ended with one final quote from her. "The skies weren't meant to divide us, they were meant to lift us." In the years that followed, the FAA's youth programs exploded in popularity. Hundreds, then thousands of new students from diverse backgrounds joined aviation academies across the country. Every time a new graduate completed their final flight test, they were asked one question: "Who inspired you to fly?" And again, the same name appeared: Elijah Jackson. His story wasn't just a turning point. It had become a foundation. A new generation of aviators now flew with a different kind of compass, one guided by courage, inclusion, and the refusal to be grounded by doubt. On a bright morning, years after that first terrifying day in the pilot's lounge, Elijah Jackson sat in the captain's seat of a Boeing 787. He looked out over the tarmac, the engines humming beneath him, the runway stretching endlessly ahead. The flight crew checked in one by one. The co-pilot turned to him. "Captain, ready for departure." Elijah smiled, fingers resting gently on the throttle. "Let's fly." As the plane lifted off, soaring into the clouds, Elijah looked out at the sky that had once felt so far away. And in that moment, he knew. This dream didn't just survive, it conquered.